before the stock market crashed, sending the country into the Great Depression, which shaped his life. He was born, grew up in Claremore, Oklahoma. His parents, Vernie Viola Taylor King and William Oliver King, had 9 children. Bill, Emmett, whose daughter is here, Linda, thank you, lives close by, connected with the family not too long ago after we moved here. And Harold. They were all born before Doug. And then came Orville, Pat, Joe Bob, George, who actually died as a baby, and finally Mike. So both sets of grandparents were, as I remember the stories, early settlers of the Oklahoma Territory. And, you know, I'm going to say here that once in a while, you know, I do have this written down, but I may go off script a bit, but it wouldn't be honoring my dad if I didn't. You know, we're telling a story to make it weave in and out here and there. And some of the things that I remember hearing about heritage was stories that somehow he came up with, that the King family was connected, particularly through Martin Luther King, and of course not the Martin Luther King, though we've had fun with that through the years, but connected to the King Ranch in Texas, and connected to Zachary Taylor President. No evidence of that we found. But, you know, it's been fun to talk about it, and those, of course, were the kinds of stories that he loved. I took a personality thing or a personal assessment a few years ago, and it told me that I could find connections and things that most people didn't see, and I said, oh, I wonder where I got that from. So Claremore was, of course, also the home of the humorist and philosopher and movie star Will Rogers, who was Doug's hero, my dad's hero throughout his life. He often quoted, and I believe both intentionally and subconsciously, based his own philosophy of life on this self-described simple man's cowboy. I am sure that had Will Rogers lived, my dad would love to find a way of joining him in his live rope act on stage, and may have in his mind, and may have in his stories at one time or another, even though Will Rogers died when he was 6. Anyone here knowing my dad, you know, knows about his storytelling, but of course he would never include fiction in it, right? However, he did learn to lasso. His dad taught him that, and he used his lassoing skills probably on a lot of us. How many here were lassoed by Doug? You know, family members? All right. Come on, Jeremy, raise your hand. I'm sure that you were lassoed by Gramps once in a while. So there's many stories that Dad told us through the years of his childhood, you know, we believe that most of them were rooted in facts. Mother and I were having a conversation about that the other day. But really, there's only bits and pieces of the first couple of decades of his life. We do know that his hair was red and his face was covered with freckles. And one story that Mom told me a few days ago was that he heard this song that included the words "partner, my partner." And I haven't been able to find it on the internet, this particular song, but I looked for it. And he would sing just those words over and over again. He was 4 years old, you know, and saying "partner, my partner." So he acquired at a very young age the nickname Partner. It evidently stuck because when he took my mom to visit Claremore for the first time, she heard several of his school friends call him Partner. And, you know, that's kind of fitting because since throughout his life he was constantly in search of partners. In fact, everybody was a partner. He didn't call them Partner, he called them George. That was his favorite name for why, I don't know. And I don't know where George came from, except for the fact that his, you know, brother who died, you know, as a baby, maybe. Doug adored his father. Most of the stories Dad told of his father pictured him as a bronc-riding cowboy. And as I understand it, they were very close. His dad taught him how to ride and how to care for horses, how to rope. But when Doug was just 15, his mother asked him to run his dad lunch job at the coal mine he was working at the time, and when he arrived, he discovered that his father, his dad, his partner, had been killed in a delayed explosion. And I can only imagine how difficult the loss was. We've heard lots of stories. I wish I'd been around to know Grandpa Keaton. I changed the course of his life, I'm sure. An already difficult existence was made worse, and a few months later, as I understand it, the house burned, which is why when the video shows up later on, there's only a few pictures of him at a young age. What tragedy and trial didn't take from Dad, possibly helped build him, but what it did build in him was a compassion, I think. A compassion for the underdog, for the overlooked. He grew to hate injustice. In fact, it started that way. Even in elementary school, I understand that he stood up for his brother Orville, who was bullied because he was different. But Dad was there to stand up for his younger brother, and I'm not surprised. So Doug didn't actually start school until he was 8. As the story goes, for some reason he walked barefoot across a bed of coals and burned his feet so bad he couldn't walk for a while. I don't know if you can see him doing that kind of thing. Sort of laughing and shaking their heads, yes. But I understand he did like school for the most part, and he charmed more than one teacher. He loved learning throughout his life. He didn't have a lot of formal education, but he had a lot of education. He learned a lot. And he played sports in school: football, basketball, baseball. His love of sports, especially football, was carried into his adult life. I remember as a child living in Lincoln, Nebraska, when I was young, and he and I started pretty early having this feud between Nebraska and Oklahoma, because they always played each other and still do to this day. He wanted his son, to be a football player. Instead, he got a pastor, an intellectual, I guess. He loved to tell the story that he borrowed from these tapes that my mother used to play for us, of the father praying, football player, and the mother praying, missionary, or pastor, and that mom won. I don't believe, however, that the fact that I wasn't a football player really that disappointed him that much. He always introduced me as preacher, pastor's son. But more importantly even, I do not feel that I was ever out of favor with my father. And I think the same can be said of the rest of the family as well. There may have been disagreements, frustrations periodically. Mom more than anybody, of course, because she was with him a long time. Grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I think we all knew his love was unconditional. When Doug was 18, he joined the Air Force. It was actually the Army Air Force at the time, but later, just shortly after that, when the Air Force became a separate branch, he opted to go that direction. And after basic training, he went home, and while on that leave, his 12-year-old brother, Joe Bob, accidentally shot him in the leg with a shotgun. And he had buckshot in his leg through the rest of his life. So, Branch and Retzel, that was, part of the issue. I guess you probably knew all of that. Shortly after he recovered, his first overseas posting was in Guam. He's a very young man, where he would help clean up from World War II there, just a few years after that war. And sometime after that, when he came back, he went a couple of places, but ultimately landed in Rapid City, South Dakota, where some of the young airmen would get together, and they would use their time to visit the local towns around the Black Hills and attend dances. Not so much because they liked to dance, but I think you can figure out why they were going there. So one Saturday they took the black 46 Chevy Club Coupe. Matthew, would you like to have that from Grandpa? Still, that would be pretty nice. They drove it to Custer, and somehow over the course, I always heard that it was this, that it was at the dance. But my mother tells me that actually they weren't together that night. It was a chance second meeting the next day, and you have to ask for the rest of the story. Mark went into that now, but it was a chance meeting the second day. But you might say he kind of swept her off her feet. He lassoed her with his charm, if you will, and many, many, many times after that with an actual rope. They were married several months later, and I asked her what attracted her to him. She told me that she was flattered at the attention that this older boy, truth, right? Gave her, the attention he gave her. But also his kind, his gentle demeanor. She also added that she liked his kisses. And she also, through the years, appreciated the fact that he could fix anything. And the fact that he loved adventure and loved travel, because so did she. He enjoyed, I know, listening to her read to us in the car, and ultimately, later on, to just him. Because she loved to read, loved books, and so did he. So Marjorie Kay, a.k.a. Mara, that way hopefully, was born the next year. When she was about 1, he transferred to England for a year and a half and drove a truck around, and he always told me that, on the wrong side of the road, and learned a lot about truck driving. There are these narrow roads. He would talk about the cities he would go in with these trucks, and these tiny, narrow European roads, and get, through them. You guys went to Europe recently, you know what I'm talking about, right? England was still also recovering in the early 50s from the war. And when he returned, he was stationed in Lincoln, Nebraska. Mara talks about the fact that during those early days, she remembers the guitar and harmonica and the Western songs, just loving the fact that her dad paid attention to her. Had fun times, going to dances some of the time, right? And whistled. That's right, yes, that's whistled. I almost forgot about the whistling. Yes, I remember he did a lot of that during those years. And then a little bit later on, when he was back in Lincoln, then Kirk Douglas, that's me by the way, was born. And when I was about 1, he transferred overseas to Korea for a year. Again, still helping clean up, this time from the Korean conflict. He's back to Lincoln. And I remember a lot of those years as well. There's so many things. We talked about songs, and Mara and Peggy and I have different memories of different songs because through the years, I guess they changed some. I remember Burl Ives, and I think one of the things that I remember, the song I remember the most, because maybe just to connect with it was Big Rock Candy Mountain. He loved that song. I don't know, I think in his vision of heaven, sometimes that song and Revelation's description of heaven may have been sort of merged a little bit. So, Jerusalem may have been next to the Big Rock. I don't know, for me, a lot of the time later on, he ended up teaching me a lot about horses, but, that actually came a little bit later on in life. But I just wanted to insert a little bit of a story here to illustrate how, the point that when I talk to my sisters and my mother and, anyone about him, it's kind of the same thing that comes up. He had this way even when you made mistakes, of just making you feel okay. So this was in Boulder after we had horses, and he was maintenance engineer of the hospital. We'll get to that later. I was up in the field with Chief. Thank you, Jerry, for those years with Chief. Chief was just there, no bridle, no harness, no saddle, and we trusted each other, and I thought he trusted me pretty well, and so I slipped on his back. And Chief just didn't want me on his back right then. He would obey if there was a bridle on. And, he didn't have to have a saddle. I rode bareback a lot, but at least a bridle. But he was in charge without the bridle, and he wanted to let me know that. A few steps away, down the hill, was a barbed wire fence. And eventually, he stopped before he got to the barbed wire fence, and I didn't. I got up and I looked down at the maintenance building, and guess who was standing outside the maintenance building? I said, I wonder if he saw me. So that night, all he said was, go for a ride today? And that's just how it was. So back to Lincoln, and a little while later, Peggy Diane came along. Peggy saw Dad, as she said, she put it, in fact, she repeated this a few times, so I think she probably meant this one, really meant this one, that he was the strongest person she knew. And in her eyes, he could do anything. A great memory, great thought for a father. And told me a story that taught her how to change a flat tire, but then when she had her first flat tire, it was a snow day at college, I think this was it, and she was up on top of this hill, and he thought it was strange that he could go change a tire and come rescue her on top of the hill, and change the tire when they couldn't even have college classes with people who lived in the dorm. More recently, she told me that as he and Mom would spend time at their house in Seattle, Christmas time, and she, like Dad, is an early riser, and so they would get up and have some really tender talks, some great times, just being together, with a cup of hot cocoa, some snacks, sitting in the living room next to the Christmas tree. So I'm also as a man of movement and action, because always moving. And, it's true what she said also, that he wasn't too sophisticated socially as some would see it, rough around the edges a little bit with that, but his heart was so good and so kind and so strong. So Lincoln was also where Evelyn and later Doug became members of the Adventist Church. And I know, just as a young child, even before I was old enough, for Pathfinders, that he loved playing drill sergeant with the Pathfinders. He had a lot of fun with that. And any club lucky enough to have him through the years excelled in drill. So those years included family camping trips, often with Pathfinders, Dad strumming the guitar, singing cowboy songs, playing the harmonica, listening to those singers I mentioned, and watching Bonanza and Gunsmoke on a 13-inch black and white television. I remember sneaking around the corner trying to do that and not getting caught by Mom, but eventually I was old enough to do it with him. For me as a son, it meant teaching me to fish, teaching me to hunt. And he did something extremely unique that I've always, I talk about too much probably, was taking me to inside of an Atlas missile site. Here is this ICBM. Took me to the bottom of it, where the rockets were. Took me to the top of it, next to the cone that encased the nuke. I was the only civilian, I was told, who had visited that particular site. This is shortly before those missiles were phased out. But what a cool experience. So, as I mentioned, my sisters and I are kind of spread out in age, and we remember that era differently, but we all agree that he loved being a father, and he made it his business to involve us in the things that he enjoyed. easy travel, camping, cars, football, hunting, fishing, and of course, rocks. And the rock shop came later, but it was still there. He picked that up from, Evelyn's family, Mom's family, the Stratton side of the family. Rock hunting in the hills, in the Black Hills. Keith, you remember some of that kind of stuff too, right? No? Going looking for Teepee Canyon agates. How exciting. Well, our experiences with Dad differ. We all agree that he was, as I mentioned, a tender soul, gentle and generous. He was transferred at the end of the time, it was about the time that Atlas missiles were being phased out in the early 60s, or mid-60s, and he was transferred to Incirlik Air Force Base in the dawn of Turkey in 1965, and he was able to take the whole family with him this time. And I tell you what, I could easily write a book, and we could be here all day talking about those experiences, but just a couple of highlights. It was a perfect setting in my mind for a free spirit like Doug. Unlike many Americans who wanted to stay on the base, we did not stay around in the base. We lived in town for 2/3 of our time there, and on the weekends we took off and we visited the castles in the area, the Roman fortress and the Crusader castles. But our favorite spot was a beach on the Mediterranean, with the ruins of two castles, one on the shore, the other about a half mile offshore. And he and Morris, as we remember, swam out and back. You did that, right? Yeah, I thought so. I thought I remember that correctly. The rest of us had to take a boat. The castle in the sea, by the way, had a wall that was agate, made of agate. So that was kind of cool. So close to that beach was a place we came to call King's Cove. Just a place off the road. Little spot, we pull down there, play in the water, and get ourselves out and just sleep under the stars. Just north of King's Cove were the Taurus Mountains that talked about in the book of Acts by Paul. One Sabbath afternoon, we were driving, we were driving off-road. We had this little Jeep pickup that we built a makeshift camper in the back, and built a fire, which wasn't legal, fired off a gun, which was also not legal to have there for, American, and then encountered several local Turkish soldiers on the way back down who'd seen the smoke and heard the gun. And Dad was able to charm them. And I don't remember all the details. I put a question mark there, but we'll have to talk more about that later. But he offered them a ride down the mountain in the end. We also drove that Jeep pickup through Syria. We wouldn't do that now, but we did then, and Jordan, all the way to Petra and back. And, it was safer then, but probably still a little on the edge. Travel was central to our life growing up, as I mentioned, and Dad's sense of adventure and wanderlust is one thing all of us appreciated. On the way home, we did some travels to Europe, and I remember the talk being said this was a millionaire's trip on a pauper's salary. So thank you, U.S. military, giving that spirit of adventure to all of us. So retirement from the military came just 1 year later, 20 years in the military in Clovis, New Mexico, Cannon Air Force Base. And actually at his retirement, he met a general whose name sounded familiar, and it turned out to be a second cousin. So, well, that would have been nice to know before. But Dad, however, never played political games. He was passed over promotion a few times as a result, and, he really wasn't a fan of any kind of bureaucracy. He loved being in the Air Force. He loved serving his country, but his mindset just didn't fit in with some of the bureaucratic ways. Born 200 years too late. Peggy reminded me of that and talked about that before. And, in a way that had both its positive and negative sides. Peggy commented as we were talking about some of these trips, that he was fearless to the point of being reckless at times. And I do agree, but probably we see it a little bit differently because, I kind of gravitated toward some of that, more reckless behavior myself, I suppose, a little more so. I remember, my fall off the mountain when I was 16 and lying on the ground after falling 75 feet off a rock and close to the hospital. And the first person on the scene, other than the friend I was climbing with, he ran down to get help. After the ambulance people were there first, but they weren't going to take me down. The first other person, my dad walked around the corner, saw me in this broken condition, and I'll never forget the look on his face. So Mara, people talk about him being a rescuer. It was for me too, not just daughters in that situation. But one of my favorite stories about Dad is how he dealt with rattlesnakes. How his dad dealt with rattlesnakes. He would tell them he said that he would let the rattlesnake have the first 2 bites and then he would bite their heads off. Which, by the way, referred to having a stick, letting them strike at the stick a couple times, and grabbing them by the tail and snapping the snake like a whip to crack its neck. I don't know. Maybe. So in New Mexico one time, I encountered a rattlesnake in the field and told my dad. And instead of saying, "Oh, I'm glad you're safe," he said, "Oh, let's go catch it." He says, "Let me teach you how to catch a rattlesnake." So we got a gunny sack and some wire and a long pole with nail on the end of it, and he taught me how to catch a rattlesnake. And we caught it, put it in a large peanut butter jar with holes in it, and took it to school the next day for show and tell. Any teachers here? Doug, what do you think? That's my name. Not quite. He enjoyed people, and he embraced our friends as if they were family. Christina was one of those friends who became family. Ty's sister Christina, good friend of Peggy, and later daughter Annie, and all of the other Ty grandkids. They just became a part of the family easily, and they loved Grandpa too. Pictures of them sitting on his lap on the backhoe, just like the other grandkids, learning to drive sometimes, because I believe, Kristen, he taught you to drive, right? And he said that when you made a mistake, he wouldn't judge you, wouldn't get mad, just laugh. He made her feel good. Speaking of driving, how many family members here did he help teach how to drive? Yeah. It was just kind of one of those things that he did. Doug carried the skills he learned in service to his country to work in maintenance as a maintenance engineer for the Adventist Hospital in Boulder and later in Greenville, Tennessee. His restless spirit and that disdain for organizational politics led him to go independent shortly after that, and involved heavy equipment, backhoes, dump trucks, semi-tractor trailer, or over-the-road truck. Mom was involved, we see that sometimes, and on the road, and he even got her driving the semi a little bit. I got to drive it a tiny bit. Never really learned that skill. He loved working, especially if he could be out or away and on the road. I think I mentioned the restless cowboy spirit, the open spaces, freedom to move and to be. I like what Peggy said. He said the life was based on the rhythm of the day and seasons instead of a clock or a schedule. He wasn't great with money management. Kind of believed that money was the root of all evil, especially when it kept him from sharing with someone in need. And he was so neighborly and generous, even to a fault. And I think, Mara, you said that even in the face of the corruption in the part of the recipient, he had a pure and simple way of looking at people, which endeared him to most, but cost him, unfortunately, to be used by some. So we as children eventually went off to school, got married, made lives of our own, and Doug and Evelyn continued the experience of life's adventures together. It was not always easy. right, Mom? There's some good times, some bad times, for better or worse. I mean, you said that, right? Dad's ability to be patient is legendary, especially for those of us who be taught to drive. But to probably Mom more than any of us, he both had and required patience at times. Still, somehow, Mom, you and Dad found a way of going on adventures together, and continued doing that after we were gone. And I know that time went on a little bit, and there were still kids around because summer times, Jeremy, Justin, ended up there with them in Tennessee and hung out with Gramps. I know you were blessed to have him in your life during that time. You told me that so many times. So for a while, Doug and Evelyn worked together raising funds for the blind in New Mexico, built a life in a familiar place then in Pringle in the Black Hills in South Dakota, back where it started, and running the King's Treasure House, rock shop, and salvaging and selling sand and scrap metal, which I always thought for Dad was more about being able to operate his backhoe and dump trucks than actually, the result of that. As I think Joel said it last night, so who wouldn't want to retire, and have 5 acre playground with sand to push around with with a backhoe and cars to play around with, tear apart. During those years, the other 4 grandchildren were added. Katie and Matthew kind of came along suddenly. And a few years after that, Douglas and Nick. And all the grandchildren, and I would include the Ty grandchildren, loved being with Grandpa. They enjoyed his pleasant demeanor and the way he treated them with gentleness and respect. They also loved his stories and have certainly retold them many times to family and friends. As health and property declined in Pringle, it was time for one more move here to Kitsap County, Washington, Port Archer, just 4 years ago. And then for him, a final move to Washington State Veterans Home. And I know so many of the staff said that they loved him because he was never angry or mean to them. Even in the midst of pain, he might cry out and never blame or complain about much about it. It hurt. But, even if he would complain, the next breath he would make a joke about the situation. He remained himself. And like everywhere he traveled, he made friends easily. I know just yesterday when we stopped up there, one of the residents said that, he was a kick in the pants. So Mom, Mara, Peggy, and I were all gathered around Dad's bed in Harrison Medical Center, December 20. As he breathed his final breath, it was time. Doug King lived life on his terms. And while he may have been out of sync with the modern world, it didn't really matter. And I believe in the end that he embraced death just as he had always embraced getting older. He was at peace about it. And that should provide comfort for us. Mom, Mara, Peggy, Christina, Jeremy, Justin, Katie, Matthew, Doug, Anna, Nick, James, Ryman, hey buddy. But Doug's story doesn't actually end here. He believes in heaven, in eternity. His faith was simple. I talk about it, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him might not perish, but have everlasting life. I don't know that he could explain a whole lot theologically, but somehow he believed that there was something else, that there was a God who loved him. And he looked forward, Mom, to being reunited with you and being with Jesus. The tangible realities of eternity, none of us can know now. But I kind of like to imagine being with him somewhere in the future again, healthy and well, saddling up our horses. be right enough together, without the restraints of time and place. From one adventure to another, telling and creating story together. But Doug lives on in another more immediate and tangible way, because he lives on in us, those of us he leaves behind. His stories live on as we retell them. His good name lives on as we, his family, live well. And so may we honor Doug, Dad, Gramps, our friend, by living gentle and generous lives. Mara put together a video from pictures, songs, and video that we all kind of try to come together and find and pull together. It's not linear. So this flow is not portrayed necessarily as it happened, but it's designed to tell the story of Dad in pictures and music in a way that I know he would have loved. Include some of the music that he loved that Mara remembers as a child, hearing him play the guitar. Here is a musical ballad of Doug's life.
Goodbye forever, it's time for me to projecting voice, so I probably shouldn't use this thing. I wrote something down, and now I'm glad I did after that. Together. Albert Einstein once said, "Our death is not an end if we can live on in our children and the younger generation. For they are us, our bodies are only wilted leaves on the tree of life." Only Graham still lives within me, and I will always remember fondly the times I spent with him, and I will miss him. I also know many others will as well. Although we will miss him, his smile, his pranks, his tall tales and stories, his love, we take consolation in the good feelings of our memories. Some of my memories include fishing trips, road trips, helping him fix things, and tagging along in his mission to help out his buddies in Summit County, Tennessee. He loved to help people. And although some of my experiences were foreign to a white kid from the suburbs, it opened my eyes to a whole other world. A world of poverty, a world where I was the minority. I learned a lot from the experience, and I grew from it. I always felt safe knowing my Gramps was there to protect me. He always saw the best in people. I learned from him that no matter how successful we may be, we have the responsibility to help others. Gramps taught me many things. How to drive a car at 11 years old. Yeah. How to change a tire, change the oil, how to fix things. He taught me how to put in a hard day's work and how to do guy stuff. I looked to him for guidance during my formative years on what it means to be a man. I learned by his example, and I am forever grateful for his example. My grandpa's generosity, work ethic, humility, and selflessness are all qualities that I admire him for, and qualities I myself aspire to. He was a simple, honest, hardworking man who lived a life of honor and integrity. He was a great teacher to have. Thank you, Gramps, for the wonderful memories to hang on to. You are a role model and a friend. Your guidance and love will carry me through to the end of my days. I love you until we meet again. I'll conclude with a poem. This was written by Claire Jones. As we look back over time, we find ourselves wondering, did we remember to thank you enough for all you have done for us, for all the times you were by our side, to help and support us, to celebrate our successes, to understand our problems and accept our defeats, or for teaching us by your example the value of hard work, good judgment, courage, and integrity? We wonder if we ever thanked you for the sacrifices you made to let us have the very best, and for the simple things like laughter, smiles, and times we shared. If we have forgotten to show our gratitude enough for all the things you did, we're thanking you now, and we are hoping you knew all along how much you meant to us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Excuse me. I'm George, the 180th or something like that. My Gramps had just along with my brother, he had a huge influence on our life for several summers, starting from when, I don't know, I guess from when I was about 6 or so until maybe 11. I can thank him for my best stories that I still tell people, probably monthly. Anything from like taking and delivering people's pig slop to various pigs in the South. And I don't know if anybody knows what that smells like, but I can still smell it. And then also taking basically huge tractor trailer trucks full of watermelons, and me and my brother and Gramps go into the slums of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and selling watermelons, and then most likely spending all the money that we made on whatever. But you know, some things that really stick out to me about my Gramps is just that he's just so non-judgmental. I mean, he really did teach me to really like help the downtrodden, and it seemed like he respected people, everyone, you know, even the most downtrodden people he respected even more, I feel like. So, you know, that open-mindedness and the non-judgmental part is really huge. Even with me, you know, he was like the first guy to treat me like an adult. He gave me kind of some decision-making power when I was younger. He didn't shelter me from, like, you know, real life and some of the bad things that can happen in real life and whatnot. And of course, you know, he taught me how to drive and really did just treat me as an adult, and I really appreciated that as a 10-year-old. So anyway, you know, he also taught me not to stress a whole lot. He wasn't like a real stressy guy. He might have been on the inside, but on the outside, he was pretty much, you know, live and let live, and just enjoy yourself. Don't stress it. Don't worry too much. And I really appreciate that. I think I got some of that from him. Some story-making ability, maybe. He also, you know, to be outside. I know that he really prioritized that. I really appreciated that. And anyway, I'll take the best of what he taught me, and I know I'll be able to pass it on to my son, George, the 181st over there, who's about to crash out. But anyway, I really miss him. I think about him a lot, and I'll carry him with me.
Now we'd like to. Wow. Should be up. Are you on there? Let me try it. There we go. Thank you. Any other stories you'd like to share, memories that you'd like to share, Doug? We'd like to open up the floor. Family would like to. If you have any stories you'd like to share, I'll be glad to run you the mic because we all want to hear them. If you have anything in particular, give you a moment to think about it for a second. Yeah.
Many of the memories I have, early memories when I was courting his lovely, beautiful daughter, Peggy, long ago, involve inevitably me lying flat on my back, generally in a very improbable body position, oftentimes covered in some sort of lubricant, with him patiently instructing from a place far, far away. Very patiently, but he was always dry. And I always wondered how this was going to work out with these things, and oftentimes was reminded of a movie where Shakespeare falls in love. And during that, when the theater owner is asked, how does the theater work? How does life work? And the theater owner says, the natural condition is one of insurmountable obstacles on the road to imminent disaster. But strangely enough, it all works out well. I don't know how. And that is one thing that I really remember about Doug. He had this amazing ability to bring things together. I will remember him for his massive paws of hands. I will remember him for his inevitable cowboy hat. One of his suspect, if not entertaining stories. I remember him teaching me to do improbable and crazy things like sweating copper pipe and sticking my hand into a 200 amp electrical panel, and things tended to work out just fine. This morning, his grandkids were reading a quote off of a coffee cup that reminded me of a moment when he was teaching me how to drive. He taught me how to back a trailer. And as we were looking up the way up this long, very narrow, rocky road, he told me to just put the back wheels where I wanted them and follow them up. And what that told me at the time was that he understood that mystery of life. That mystery of life was a little bit of skill, a little bit of patience, a lot of courage, and some faith. And I will thank him for that.
Anyone else? Any other story you might have you'd like to share?
Hi, everybody. I didn't get the privilege of knowing you quite as long as some of you here, but I'm Matt. I'm Kirk's son. I was adopted into the family, and I was about 3. And the only thing that I really want to say about my grandfather is that he never acted like I was adopted. I was always part of the family. From the very first time I ever met him. And as he grew up, as I grew up, as part of that injury that he sustained, the knee, he needed a cane to get around, and he used to use it in rather creative ways to wrangle me in if he couldn't actually lasso me. So I'm George, number probably about 50. Well, we're always going to miss him. And I'll never forget some of the things that have already been mentioned about him several times over. Bears repeating. He was a man that took life as it was and didn't need it to be any more complicated than it had to be. And I'm always going to respect him for that. It reminds me sometimes that when I'm trying to overcomplicate life, I just kind of remember what would my grandfather do. Because he wasn't a man to make things super complicated. So, thanks to everybody for coming out to say their memories of him. I'm going to give the mic back before I lose it. So.
Well, my name's Georgianne, so when I met Doug, I introduced myself. I said, but those who know and love me call me George. He goes, well, everyone's George. I didn't get it until this very moment. Now I get it. But he really enjoyed music. And I remember one of your guys' first Sabbaths in Port Orchard. I invited folks to stick around after the potluck because I was going to be running through the songs that we were singing the following Sabbath for the Christmas sing-along. And if they needed a preview, that would be a good time to get that. Well, there's Doug, there's Evelyn, and they're beaming, and he's just happily soaking in on the music.
Thank you. Anyone else? Over here, you're pointing. Oh. You stand right there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to tell you that I am one of the CNAs of Mr. Dog who passed away in Rich Hill. The way I remember him is that he is a very good patient or resident. He never complains, and he never says something. When it's time for you to go there, he will just smile. And it gives courage and also happy feeling for all the caregivers, if that is the attitude of your resident. Thank you so much, and we love him, and in behalf of Rich Hill or Washington Veterans Home, we say condolence.
Yeah. And thank you very much.
You're welcome. Mike's cool. Okay, if you want to think of something a little later, even if I'm talking and you're saying something a little later, you interrupt me because what you have to say is important, okay? All right. You have permission to talk to me, talk anytime you want today. Anyone else? What George number are you?
She's so much.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm referring to the guy back there. He was, yeah. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to say that I really didn't know Doug too well. I had met him a couple of times, but I'm just thankful for the blessing that I'm sure we've all received, just learning about him, and I feel bad that I didn't get to know him more. But I just want to thank you for sharing with us.
You know you have a good memorial service when people wish they knew more. That's great. Anyone else? If not, I believe there's we have a gentleman young man here.
So I was visiting. I was like 7, and I was in Cub Scouts at the time, and I kind of got confused with Boy Scouts when I was there, and I thought you needed a pocket knife to be in Boy Scouts. So I was with Grandpa, and then we were getting ready to leave, and then my mom was out in the car. I was like, "This is my time." And then I asked Grandpa, "Hey, do you have a pocket knife? Because I'm in Boy Scouts, and they a pocket knife." So he pulls something out and he hands it to me. And as soon as I get to the car, I was like, "Look at this!" And she snatched it, and I haven't seen it since.
Man, so close.
I remember he taught me how to work with electricity in these big circuit breakers, and that it was okay to stick your hand in there. But he also taught me that you could put big holes in lineman dikes if you weren't paying attention, and that was under his watch.
I know one of the things that me, as well as my brother and my entire family, when we would go to South Dakota, we would go stay with our grandpa. But one of our favorite things to do, aside from the tourist things, is we didn't care about that. We wanted to go see Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Doug. It was one of our favorite things. And I know my little sister, she loved hearing all the stories, especially about Uncle Doug's canes and walking sticks. That was one of her favorite things.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Amazing Grace. I'd like to choose your mic. Is there enough power? Make sure the batteries. It says 2 or 1. Should work. All right. That's why the scriptures say it's always better to go to a house of mourning than a house of mirth. You learn a lot more about what really is important and what really matters. And it's been a privilege to, in many ways, learn the life of Doug. Scripture reading, that seems appropriate. I heard the stories. Kurt walked together well, embellished by all of you. I think of Isaiah, and the three words I'm thinking of is justice, gentleness, and generosity. Behold my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights. I've put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice. He will not cry out or raise his voice, nor make his voice heard in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break. A dimly burning wick he will not extinguish. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice on the earth. And the coastlands wait for his rule. So apropos, a man who is spoken of as so gentle, a man who is spoken of as so generous, a man who is spoken of having a passion for justice, for the downtrodden, for the bruised, very gently bringing it about. It's not surprising that the first song sung by Georgiana would be his favorite, having heard his life story. A city, a holy city. Of course, it would be complete with all the jewels and the precious stones. It's a city that you want to live in. It's a place you want to be because justice rains down and there's peace like a river. You mentioned that he didn't smile a lot, but of course that's because life happens quite seriously when you're 15 years old and you have to grow up real quick. And your mom passes away a few years later, you have to be an adult real fast, and that sometimes takes away a few extra smiles. But it also forges you to be the kind of adult that you wanted to be all along, but just didn't have all the guidance that you were hoping to get along the way. And I suspect, though he was not a man for a lot of words up front, I would bet that he was very, very happy inside, because in a world full of lots of things that people could do wrong, he had to do some things right, and he did a lot of things right from what I've heard. And I would suspect as a father, looking at a son, I only relate to it from his perspective because I know how I felt when my son was a preacher for a while. And my dad died when I was 16. And you feel like you did something right if one of your offspring come up and becomes a preacher. You did something right, Lord. Being the good Lord had something going. And I just think he really, that made him smile on the inside in many ways. It's a city, though, when you read about it, the city on the hill that he longs for. A new Jerusalem with precious stones is written about from the perspective of the experience of those who will occupy it. It's an experience that I shared over this morning, but I'm drawn to those same words again about this city and about this place. It's a place where the tabernacle of God is among men. Though you can feel very much like you're with God when you're out in the open plains of the Big Sky country of Oklahoma, Nebraska, all those places, you feel very some ways you get an appreciation for the huge and the big and large. But it says in this place, a place that we pray for, the things that we pray for and long for that don't ever seem to be answered, it is a place where the God of this place wipes away all tears. Not only is meaningful if you've shed a few in your life, when you come upon the brokenness and the hurt and the pain, it's a place where the tears are wiped away. And it's a place that says there's no longer any death. And if you were a person that came upon you very early in life, you would really look forward to that kind of place where there isn't any of that. It's a place where there's no longer any mourning or crying or pain. And if you've had to ride the rough road sometimes and experience those things, it only gives you the experience of saying, boy, I wish I could be there. I wish I could get there sooner than later. I wish I could be there with all the ones I love who are going through the same stuff that I go through. It's a place where all these first things have passed away. The good things are yet to come, because it says, behold, I'm making all things new. Right, for they're faithful and they're true. And I'm hoping that we can look forward to the time when he gets to finish the rest of his story and the rest of our story with us. It sounds like he was a great storyteller. And there'll be a lot more words, I think a few more smiles in that place. At this time, because Doug had served not only his family very well, but because he served our country very well, they have allowed to have, and they have here the honor guard. And I'd like to invite them to present the flag. And after that, they will lead us outside for a salute. So, gentlemen. to follow the other one. And then afterwards, return to the foyer.
then you're coming back to Thailand. That's what I'm thinking. The most beautiful airport is like skinny. Skinny? I'm the biggest one. Oh, you have to live here. Let us balance. You can do that. Yeah. What's fun? Or either whichever way that we look fit. No,
She's not like that. I gave it to her. Try not to. And she goes, oh,
I'm one of the 50% there.
you do that.